and welcome to NTD News. I'm Cindy Drucare. U.S. President Donald Trump announced a deal today to sell more American beef to Europe.
At 1:45 p.m. today, a trade agreement on beef was unveiled between U.S. President Donald Trump and the European Union.
Today we're signing a breakthrough agreement that will make it easier to export American beef into the European Union. We've been under negotiation for quite a while, and our beef farmers, we didn't think were being treated fair, but the European Union stepped up.
The European Commission has stressed that all the beef coming in would be hormone-free, in line with EU food safety rules. It also stated that any beef deal will not increase total beef imports.
This is a tremendous victory for American farmers, ranchers, and of course European consumers, because American beef is considered the best in the world.
EU diplomats revealed in June that the deal would allow the U.S. a guaranteed share of a 45,000-ton EU quota. The agreement will need to be approved by the European Parliament. The announcement coincides with Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping's ongoing trade war. Trump said yesterday he would impose a 10% tariff on $300 billion of Chinese imports starting September 1st, and threatened to further raise tariffs if Xi fails to strike a deal.
And more news from the president today. He signed a 2-year budget deal in which year one is worth $1.3 trillion. President Trump pushed for the deal, which suspends the debt limit through July 2021. By preventing default on U.S. debt, the new law eliminates the threat of a financial disaster through the election cycle, while also avoiding cuts to military funding. Trump also pointed out that lawmakers can make spending cuts later. The budget puts money in Congress's hands for the next 2 years, but it has yet to decide how to allocate those funds. The second set of Democrat debates are over, but Team Trump says it's going to be tough for the Blues to sell their socialist ideas to the American people. NTD's Miguel Moreno finds out why.
Let me just start out by answering that question.
The debates were heated at times. While some candidates felt that their fellow Democratic members were going too far with socialist policies, others felt they weren't going far enough. And this is exactly what President Trump drew on during his rally in Ohio.
Liberal politicians want to eliminate private health care and force everyone onto the government plan.
Before the president was on stage, we spoke with his deputy communications director, Aaron Perrine, who said Democrats will have a tough time selling those ideas to Americans.
What Democrats want to espouse, they don't even at the left base anymore. They've gone off the edge. They're out of control with these policies where they think government knows best.
And in Ohio, coal is very important. Many candidates believe in completely eliminating carbon emissions. And according to Data for Progress, 6 of the 21 have endorsed the socialist Green New Deal.
If you look at what you saw last night, Joe Biden said he wants to do away with the coal industry and the gas industry. He's going to have a tough time selling that kind of bad policy in a state like Ohio, in a state like Michigan, in a state like Pennsylvania or Wisconsin.
By debating these policy plans on national television, Perrine said the Democrats basically advertised for the re-election of President Trump. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
And the Republican National Committee today passed a resolution condemning forced organ removal from prisoners of conscience in China. Investigators say the Chinese Communist Party has been doing this for nearly 2 decades. NTD's Holly Kellum spoke with the sponsor of the resolution.
We want the world to know this human rights ongoing crime.
Sean Steele is a National Republican committeeman representing California and the sponsor of the resolution. He first heard about forced organ removal several years ago during a trip to Helsinki, Finland, but didn't believe it.
What government would be engaged in literally taking body parts from live people and selling them?
Selling them to anyone who can pay tens of thousands of dollars for one organ. What finally convinced him, he says, was the UK-based China Tribunal. The tribunal was set up as an independent body to investigate the claims of forced organ removal by the Chinese Communist Party. In June, it concluded the claims were true.
And this is something that is so unforgivable, it will be remembered throughout human history as one of the lowest points in humanity.
He says the resolution passed unanimously with minimal pushback from fellow committee members.
This resolution would not have been approved unless the White House said it was okay.
The Trump administration condemned the practice during the release of its annual Religious Freedom Report in June.
We share reports again that others make that Chinese authorities have subjected prisoners of conscience, including Falun Gong, Uyghurs, Tibetan Buddhists, and underground Christians, to forcible organ harvesting.
Steele says he plans to bring the issue up again next year when the committee votes on the national GOP platform. He says he hopes the Democratic National Committee will do the same. Holly Kellum, NTD News.
And in Russia-U.S. relations, the United States today formally withdrew from the Reagan-era nuclear treaty with Russia. They're blaming Moscow for repeatedly violating the rules.
The U.S.-Russia Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, or INF, was signed more than 30 years ago by President Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. As of today, it is canceled. The NATO Secretary General blames Russia for repeat violations of the treaty.
The new Russian missiles are nuclear capable, mobile, and hard to detect.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo also blamed Russia for the demise of the 1987 treaty.
We can no longer be restricted by the treaty while Russia shamelessly violates.
The upside of exiting the treaty is the U.S. will now be allowed to test new missiles. China already has similar weapons. North Korea has been testing their own this week.
Russia has cheated or is cheating on treaties.
Concerns of a new arm race are growing, as Russian targets could include European ports and cities in the event of war.
The threat is not American withdrawal from the INF Treaty. The threat is the Russian missiles already deployed.
President Trump also announced sanctions on Russia yesterday for chemical weapons use after an ex-Russian spy and his daughter were poisoned by Russian agents with a banned nerve agent on British soil. Russia has denied the claims. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
And back on home soil, the U.S. economy added 164,000 jobs in July. The unemployment rate remained the same at 3.7%. Wages ticked up 3.2% from a year earlier. The pace of hiring has slowed to an average of 140,000 new jobs per month over the last 3 months. Employment gains were powered by the fast-growing professional and business services and healthcare and social assistance. And also in health, the Trump administration's proposal for a pharmaceutical drug import plan is meeting with opposition from drug makers. They say the plan is a dangerous scheme. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg spoke with an expert who called their comments fear-mongering.
The proposed program would allow states, pharmacies, and drug distributors to develop pilot programs to import drugs from other countries, primarily Canada.
There's a bit of fear-mongering campaign in Canada that this type of proposal, this will be a catastrophe, people will die, the pharmacy shelves will be empty, so it's all about drug shortages in Canada.
One of the obstacles of the plan to import drugs is the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's track and trace system, designed to stop harmful and counterfeit drugs from circulating in the United States. Pilot programs would be required to show how they will comply with the system. Drug industry trade group leaders and lobbyists have condemned the proposal, saying importing drugs is dangerous and could introduce counterfeit products.
Maybe drug companies will give their approval, but will make sure that they create artificial shortages in Canada to force the Canadian government to stop the export to the United States.
Gagnon says if Canada is doing the right thing in terms of drug price regulations, then the U.S. should consider implementing the same type of regulations as a long-term solution. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
And now to Hong Kong. Dissent against Hong Kong authorities' handling of months of protests and the extradition bill that started it continues to grow. And now Hong Kong's government is facing opposition from within.
This is the first time in Hong Kong's history that civil servants are demonstrating against their government. Thousands attended the rally in Chater Garden today, despite a government statement asking them to keep politically neutral. They echoed the 5 demands of earlier protests, which includes democratic reform and withdrawal of the bill that would allow extradition to mainland China.
I'm a civil servant, but at the same time, I'm also an ordinary citizen of Hong Kong.
And I think that Hong Kong government officer received the monthly salary from the government, but the money which come from the government is come from the tax of the Hong Kong people. So I have a responsibility to represent to the Hong Kong people to strike for the freedom, to strike for what we think that we are right.
Attendees included the city's one-time number 2 official, former Chief Secretary Anson Chan. Demonstrators announced a mass strike scheduled for Monday across sectors such as transport, schools, and corporations, which could bring the city to a standstill. Several Hong Kong banks announced to their employees that staff could make their own decisions about whether to come into the office on Monday. A grand strike across the banking industry is the first of its kind in Hong Kong's history as a finance capital.
And in Europe, American rapper A$AP Rocky has been released from Swedish custody. That's 3 days into his high-profile assault trial, with even President Donald Trump commenting on the development.
The judge, Per Lennerbrandt, said A$AP Rocky and his 2 friends were free to leave the country ahead of his verdict due on August 14th, a ruling that in Sweden often points to an acquittal or a sentence that is less than the time that defendants have already served. At the judge's announcement, the rapper shared a long hug with his lawyer, then with his co-defendants, and ran over to the courtroom gallery to hug his friends and family who cheered the decision.
Well, we're satisfied. We had 2 goals. One goal was that my client was going to be a free man today, and that have we achieved. And then we're hoping for an acquittal in 14 days, but we have to wait and see.
The high-profile legal case caught the attention of several celebrities and even President Trump. Following A$AP Rocky's release, Trump wrote on Twitter, A$AP Rocky released from prison and on his way home to the United States from Sweden. It was a rocky week. Get home ASAP, A$AP. A$AP Rocky, whose real name is Rakeem Mayers, was detained on July 3rd in connection with a street brawl in Stockholm in the early hours of June 30th and was later charged with assault causing actual bodily harm.
When Jim Michaels started watchmaking, people came to his shop looking for something to tell time. And today, people come to him for a piece of artwork. NTD reporter Shiwen Rong is in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, at one of the last bastions of watchmaking called the House of Time.
For Jim Michaels, watchmaking is not just changing a part.
You have to know a lot more than just replacing wheels. You have to know metallurgy, you have to know chemistry, you have to know a lot of math. There's a lot of skills involved in it.
Michaels has been interested in the mechanical since he was a child. In fact, it was a watch from his father that sparked that interest.
I remember opening the back and seeing all those tiny wheels and all those parts and all this stuff, and I thought, this is really cool. So I kept that watch, and then when I graduated from Switzerland, I restored it and gave it to my father.
He's been a horologist or watchmaker for more than 53 years. His success?
And there's so few people left that really are old school, I call old school watchmakers that know really how to do the watchmaking. And we're so busy that we don't have time to do it anymore. You know, I mean, you just can't do it. There's really no place to learn this anymore.
He became one of the few watchmakers in town. Many visitors to the House of Time are drawn in by the unusual and sometimes one-of-a-kind timepieces from the mechanical era.
There's very few mechanical things today that are 200 years old or even 300 years old that you can get working like they originally intended. You know, there's not many of those left at all.
Some clients come to get a piece of history. Students also come to marvel at Michael's handiwork.
And I show them the inside of it, and they just eyes get this big around. I go, wow, this is really cool. What makes it work?
And Michaels will tell them magic. And the reason he likes to restore the watches...
it brings history back, and it saves history, I think.
For Michaels, old watches have a heart and a soul.
The old watches are handmade. All of the old ones were handmade. And you can tell they have a personality of their own. You can tell the person who made them. You can tell his personality because he took the time to do things that no one else would see except another watchmaker.
And when someone asks him why anyone would pay so much for a mechanical watch when they can get one for $5, he always tells them,
I mean, you can have a tree that's paint by numbers, it's worth nothing, or you could have a Rembrandt tree and it's a piece of art. That's the big difference. I mean, one's done by a master and one isn't.
Today, watchmaking has become a dying art.
It's history. You shouldn't, just because history has changed doesn't mean you forget it. you got to know where you've come from to where you're going.
For Michaels, he hopes to keep this moment in time alive.
And who'd have thought goats could help clean up to prevent wildfires? One school in California tried it for 2 weeks and they're happy with the results. NTD's reporter Eileen Eng is in Danville to see what the hills look like now.
Every year by the end of May, the Athenian school has to make sure that the weeds are properly trimmed away from houses and buildings, a process called weed abatement. It's something that they have to do annually before fire season in the summer. Traditionally, they would use electric or gas mowers. This year, they decided to take a different approach.
This year, we decided to use goats for a good chunk of the weed abatement project and use just the mowers for some of the easier to reach areas.
The 75-acre school rented 300 goats for 2 weeks. It is the school's first time using goats to do the cleanup. The full-time herder brought in especially hungry ones ranging in size and age.
Goats are able to get down in crevices and deep into the creek that it's really difficult with mowers. And goats will eat everything organic, and they just cleared the brush so effectively.
So it's been a few months since the goats were here, but as you can see, it's mostly flat, so you can see that the goats did a pretty good job of cleaning most of it up.
See how the trees are sort of eaten up to this point? I mean, they were, like I said, they were on their hind legs eating the bottoms of the tree, the leaves, obviously. And so they cleaned out that.
Fencing around them kept both the goats and humans safe from each other. The herdsmen moved the fencing with the goats as they went around the school. Lucas says it is slightly more expensive, but the benefits outweigh the costs.
I think students in between finals would go out and look at the goats, and I think it was rather zen-like. I think it was very calming to the community. I think everyone loved the environmental sustainability aspect of it.
Lucas is very happy with the results and says she would do it again in a heartbeat. Eileen Ing, NTD News, Danville, California.
And that's all for today's NTD News. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Cindy Drucker.